Today's episode is with our first race car driver. He's the past owner of a NASCAR charter and is a wealth of information about all things racing, athletics, and the life in the fast lane. Today's episode is with Matt Tifft. Start with, but maybe before we get into it, you could just give people a little bit of background because, like, you know, we've never done anything before, so maybe just talk people a little bit about your background, kind of what you're doing today, what you've done over the last few years, and then, man, I'd love to kick off with just talking about how you got into it. You know,
thanks for having me on. My name is Matt Tifft. I am 27 years old. I live in Cleveland, Ohio now. I'm originally from Northeast Ohio. I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina in 2014. To go chase this crazy dream of being a NASCAR driver. I started driving go-karts, kind of like Mario Kart go-karts, when I was 10 years old, and just chased that for a long time. I raced in the NASCAR trucks, Xfinity, which are kind of like the minor leagues, and then the Cup Series eventually in 2019. I was, if you Google me, you'll find very quickly that in 2016 I had a brain tumor. I had that a surgery on that. I came back to NASCAR, so first one to ever do that. Then 2019, unfortunately, I suffered a seizure at Martinsville. Not exactly sure how it happened exactly, but probably some ties to some crashes and some neurological things, being more sensitive to that from the brain tumor. And then so I kind of stopped my racing career, but I had no idea where I wanted to go. And then I became NASCAR's youngest team owner in 2021. And I did up until November of last year and sold the team for the highest ever amount in NASCAR history, moved back to Cleveland. And of course, chasing the stupid drug that I always do, I'm going back into racing myself this year.
It hurts so good, right? It hurts so good, man.
Exactly.
So much in there, super cool. Like so much in there I want to get into, but actually, back to Charlotte, like go-kart days, Mario Kart style. So, I think this was like last year. We went out to that GoPro racing track outside of Charlotte, and they were doing the go-kart racing with the kids. Dude, what's the dynamic like in that world? Because I mean, I know nothing about that. So these kids are competing, like trying to get an initial, like, is there a tour? Like, what is, and how is it funded? Like, are there sponsors and stuff for that?
Well, the easiest question to answer at first from the funding side is it's the parents. I mean, it's just going into, if you're going to play soccer or hockey, whatever, all the equipment, everything you're buying. Go-kart racing is not too bad. I mean, you have to buy the upfront cost of the go-kart and the trailer, of course. But once you get into it, it's not terrible. But so I started around the Ohio area. GoPro, they call it a Track House Motorplex now. It's one of the most fun places you can go to. But I mean, you literally have kids starting at 5 years old.
Dude, it was
that
insane.
Will go into
These
go-kart
kids
racing.
were like, you know, yay high, sending it. I mean, they were going so fast. I don't know how fast they were, but it was wild.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, you got 5-year-olds going 45 to 50 miles an hour in a go-kart.
And you're like 2 inches off the ground. It's like
Well, there's no seat belts because they're designed when you crash to throw you out. It's better for you to be thrown out. Yeah. So it's very, very different than what you kind of think. Because you go to, you know, a K1 Speed or something like that, the rental carts you can go do on a vacation, and you're strapped in there and everything. But real racing go-karts, you want to be thrown because if you get in a flip, they want you to get the road rash rather than being smashed in your head. Yeah. So it's a very different philosophy. And it's crazy because I was in, go-kart racing, there's age classes from 5 all the way to being an adult. So I was in the NASCAR Cup Series in 2019. I had not driven a go-kart in forever, like a long time. Yeah. And I hopped back in one. And these are just little rocket ships. I mean, you're going in the high-powered ones I was driving. I did them at 13. I'm jumping back in at 22 years old at the time, going 90, 95 miles an hour in these things. and you're just holding on like your ass has to be planted in the
Yeah,
seat
I'm
and
sure.
everything you got is in it because it's so intense. I mean, it legit is, the precursor to a lot of open wheel racing because I did
Okay.
all road course stuff
Yeah,
with it.
that makes sense.
Um, but I mean, you got 12 and 13-year-olds going 90 miles an hour bump drafting on some of these giant tracks, and
Crazy.
the crashes are wicked. And I literally called my mom after that, and my mom was one of the most scared people when I
Yeah.
got into my racing career. I said, "How did you let me do that? Like that is nuts."
What were
And
you
this is while I'm
thinking,
in
Mom?
NASCAR. I'm like, why did you let me do this? This is insane.
Wait, I mean, so I gotta ask. I mean, I'm sure everyone asks this, but did you ever get in like a crash where you were thrown out of one of these things? I mean, what?
No,
Yeah.
luckily I didn't. I got in a yard cart that was souped up
Yeah.
2 years ago, and
I don't even
I
know what a
sailed
yard.
it going
What
about
is a yard
70,
cart? What's this?
just like one you can buy, just like one you can go run in your backyard or
Oh,
whatever.
okay. Yeah,
But we
yeah, yeah,
but we got one from like Harbor Freight, and we threw a big motor in it,
yeah.
and I was sailing it, probably going 55 or 60, tried to do like a quick 180
Oh,
turn,
yeah, classic.
and I flipped it. Yeah, so I flipped it and smashed my head on the roll cage and everything. That's the first time I've actually flipped, which was pretty incredible because it's after my racing career, well, during the
Gee.
pause of my racing career, I should say
Yeah,
now, that
yeah.
I actually flipped something.
You got out of the go-kart safe, man. That's insane. So these kids are like basically on these kind of like family funded teams, but then in general, I'm assuming is this like a league? Like what's sort of like the pinnacle of go-karting in the United States?
Yeah, I'd say the parallel at that level is probably competitive cheer. So you
Mm,
have your local shows, your regional shows,
got
and
it.
then you can go compete at nationals, kind
Mm-hmm.
of a deal. So the World Karting Association, or WKA, is the big sanctioning body with it. So there's multiple different classes, and there's other series affiliated with it too, but that's the most well-known
Yeah.
version of it. But there's the Great Lakes series of it. There's a Southeastern series. They're all regions. But then if you want to go on the national tour, much like many steps in racing, you start at the local level, work up to regional, and then go see the nationals. And then if you're good enough from there, you kind of move up into the next rank of
Yeah.
whatever that might be for you.
Dude, I remember we went and we were just doing like, they have the public carts there for like, you can just show up and like do a couple rounds. And it was wild, but I remember in the parking lot I'm looking around and like, I'm sure they're not the same size as like, NASCAR Cup team trailers, but like these are like legit rigs that these people have, and they've got the carts on the wheels and they're taking them around and they're, tuning this and switching this out and taking it to the track. Like I was just amazed at like all the support that went in to this kart racing, which to me, I guess just from the surface, I was like, this is wild, but the back end is just as insane in some cases.
Yeah. It's crazy because you can do kart racing very affordably. You can also you can spend 5 grand in a year on it
Yeah.
easily in like an affordable way. That's not terrible. You can do it that way. You can also spend $200,000 real quick.
Wow. That's, yeah, just crazy scale.
But it just depends on what you want to do. So that area in Charlotte,
Mhm.
where you're talking about, is the mecca of racing. A lot of those people there, I mean, growing up go kart racing at the national level, I raced against so many
Mm.
current NASCAR drivers, current IndyCar drivers.
Cool. Yeah.
Logan Sargent, who's the F1 driver now, I raced against him when I was little. And, there's so many people that come out of these ranks that it really is a proving grounds and kind of like the breeding grounds to the giant celebrities and athletes we see in all motorsports, not just
Yeah.
NASCAR. And the funny thing is, NASCAR drivers catch a lot of shit because they're saying, oh, they just turn left and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Well, they actually turn left and right about 6 times a year. They do road course
That's
racing.
right. Yeah.
But, those drivers typically come from a vast degree of backgrounds.
Mm.
And a lot of people come from road course racing, of going left and right, and they're
Yeah.
specialists in sports car racing, and they come into NASCAR. Yeah, they do a lot of oval racing, but it's not like it used to be in the 80s and 90s where it
Yeah.
was just short track racing.
Yeah. Dude, so okay, last thing on the go-karting stuff, because I find this like I found it like amazingly entertaining watching these kids doing it. But also, it was like blatantly obvious when we were there. Like some of these kids were like really nice and like were just lapping everyone. And then there were like a couple kids who were just, hanging out in the back. What is the interpersonal dynamic when you're like teenager racing? Like, is there like a track king? Like what's the dynamic when you roll up? You're like you're with your family. You're at like the GoPro track. It's like race weekend or whatever. Like, are there a couple kids who you're like, oh, I'm gunning for Johnny, like I'm coming for him, or like what are you thinking going into that as a kid?
Yeah, I think it's, kind of like in football where
Yeah,
you have cornerbacks and wide receivers are like, I got his number today, that
yeah,
kind of a deal.
yeah,
So, I mean, if you got a shot or not. I mean, kids, of course, some are delusional and they're just out there doing nothing. And hey, they're having a good time,
yeah.
And there's a lot of those.
Totally fine, totally part of it.
It's great. Yeah, absolutely. The worst person there is, because I've seen a lot of these growing up, is the kid who thinks he's the thing. Like he thinks
Oh
he's
yeah,
him, right? And
yeah.
and he's 11 years old and getting lapped out there. That's sad to see, honestly, because like they want to be really good,
Oh, I
and
got you.
some people
Yeah,
just have it. I
yeah.
mean, they really have it. You can definitely spend enough time in a go-kart to be really good at it. Just
Yeah.
like anything, you may not have the
Put the
skill,
time
but you
in.
can work at it.
Yeah.
But like those kids you're talking about who are just whooping everybody, there's typically, just in any racing, 3 to 5 guys, that, we'll show up to Atlanta in NASCAR, and the 3 to 5 guys who are going to be good there. You go to Sonoma, California, and the 3 to 5 guys that are going to be really good. So that, I think that's true in anything, though, right? I mean,
That's true. Yeah, that's a great.
you go to the Brown Stadium, and Denzel Ward is going to be a lockdown corner.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you just
yeah.
know those
That's
people.
right. That's right. So you kind of hit on that, like, advancing, like people who are good at racing. Is it, you're getting out of go-karting, trying to develop this career, like what makes a good racer? Like, what are like, can you tell when someone's like in a go-kart situation, or like, what are you looking for as you're developing to be like, oh, this guy has promise, or like this guy's going to be something on a national stage one day?
Yeah, it's really interesting in that level, especially when people are so young.
Yeah.
Typically, the thing you see is there's a couple of different personalities in the driving style you will see. Usually the best ones that will make it, they're fearless and they're fast.
Mm-hmm.
And they just have the ability to hop in and they go. Sometimes they know what they're doing, sometimes they don't, but they'll take those chances. They'll see these gaps and
Got
just
it.
go for it.
Yeah.
There's some that are very calculated, may not be as fast as those kids, but they're going to be hanging around second or third, and you can see them crafting. We call it racecraft. The racecraft's really good. So they're strategizing, they're watching the chess pieces move, and they can pounce when they need to, but they're not going to do something stupid. And those are totally different styles. If you're a NASCAR fan, Mark Martin was one of the most calculated drivers, but he was also fast. But a lot of the times he'd finish second. I think he finished second so many times. But because of that, in the old point system back in the day, he was consistently a contender because through attrition, he was going to be there. He was going to be in that spot. You look at a lot of guys when they first come into their careers, they are fast, but they're wild men. They will wreck everything. I think Jeff Gordon, they said he crashed, I don't even know how many dozen chassis he crashed and just totaled them. And Rick Hendrick had to sit him down and say, like, we've got to figure this out. You can't keep on crashing. Cost me too much money,
Breaking the budget,
so,
Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you are the fast kid, when you're the fast guy, every level you go up there to full body stock cars or open wheel big cars, you have to learn to harness that. But then the guy who's calculated, he's got to become more aggressive.
What are the different? Walk us through like what the different ranks are before you would get to what the main, or I guess the main stage would be.
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of people have different paths there now, but I'd say the stereotypical one would be go-kart racing. You're probably there until you're about 12, 13 years old. And then when you're 13, you start looking at full-size cars, typically a class called late models. Now, a lot of race car driver regulars will come and race late models as well. But if you If you look at your local track schedule, more than likely they're going to have late models on there. They're
Yeah.
full body stock cars going, 100 plus miles an hour. And there's same thing, local, regional, national shows on those. They have a lot of streaming coverage, some like Mav TV type of coverage on
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah.
And that is usually the proving ground. It's kind of like the NBA D League. There's one more step above that, the ARCA racing series that kind of fits that D League college basketball kind of area where you kind of get into some of the higher ranks. You're having agents and scouts and teams hear about you. You're really breaking down some of the best short track drivers in the country. And some of what's crazy in NASCAR is you have to have funding. You have to have sponsorship. Some of the best short track racers across the country could be in NASCAR today and be NASCAR champions. It's a very weird system. So to get past that late model point, you've got to have funding. You've got to have skill. And once again, you've got to have funding. It costs so much money to go racing in NASCAR's top series. And so NASCAR has the NASCAR Cup Series. That's the major leagues. NASCAR Xfinity Series on Saturdays. And so if you go to a Sunday race, there's a Saturday supporting series there. And then the trucks, which are usually the Friday race. And those are all incredibly tough series, nationally televised, nationally done. But to break into that, one race at a minimum for a good team in a truck, this is like, D2, D3, single A kind of a deal. It still costs for a good truck 120 to 140 grand per race.
Whoa.
And you have to have backing, whether it's private, manufacturer and team, or sponsorship funding.
Dude, that's crazy. We got to get into the numbers because I find that fascinating. But back to, I was thinking about like this progression that you got to go through to get to that point, and the late model stuff. Quick aside, I did the Richard Petty experience outside of
nice.
Greensboro. I did it for Father's Day. We did it one time, and they got us out there.
That's actually how it got started into this whole thing.
No way. Really?
Yeah. I mean, I was always a big racing fan. My dad had a car and like his friend raced it, but I was at, it was Father's Day, just like you.
That's hilarious.
We were at the Nashville Super Speedway, and it was the Jeff Gordon Racing School, which is like the sister thing to a Petty school.
Nice.
And my dad, he drove it. And then I got to ride with like a, quote unquote professional driver in the passenger seat. And all the people are getting out because like the school cars you drive are kind of slow. The one with the driver goes faster. It's still like 3/4 speed of a real cup car. But all the people before me, like the girls are screaming, the guys are like, oh my gosh, that's insane. And then I'm doing it. I'm like, huh,
that was all right.
This is cool. And they're like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, it was fun. Like just no emotion. Like it just felt right. Like I'm not good at sports. I played video games of NASCAR all the time. I'm like, oh, wow, that's cool. It's like, yeah, the wall's closer over here than I thought it might be, But so I'm curious, how was your experience with the Petty school?
Well, so we did the professional driver part first, and then we did the drive your own part second. And the first time I ever got in the car, and I've never been a claustrophobic person. Like I've done the spelunking where you're trying to squeeze through the rocks, but for some reason, when I got into that car with the gear on and the helmet, I was actually super claustrophobic at first. And then I got the helmet like positioned better so I could see more. And then I got really comfortable. And I remember that guy sending it, and I didn't realize, he was saying something about how the track hadn't been like cleaned off yet, and the car was spinning a little bit.
What track were you at?
Dude, it was outside of Greensboro, Winston-Salem, little track.
Was that Martinsville or North Wilkesboro?
Wilkesboro.
Yeah.
I think it was that one. So the car was sliding way more than I was expecting, which was a crazy feeling to me coming around the turns. So that was super fun. And then they put me in they put us in our own car. And I've in my life, I've driven a lot of different vehicles, tractors, lawnmowers, we had our own little go-karts, boats, really comfortable driving. But in all that time, I've never driven a manual car. I've only ever driven like manual tractors. So this was my first time ever actually being in a manual car. But really all you have to do is like drop it into third. You don't really have to do, I'm preaching to the choir here, but for people listening, you don't really have to like gear change a lot. You just kind of put it in one gear, or at least that's what they told us to do. So I get out there and you're in this completely alien environment going around the track, and they're talking to you on the headset. And I'm going on, I'm like, this is crazy. Like, I'm actually on a track in a race car. And then they're like in the headphones, they're like, number 44, you need to drop it in the third or something. Like I was in like the second gear for the first lap, thinking I was having this race car experience. So then I put it into third, and my dad was sending it. Like my dad's driven a lot of stuff just like me, even more than I have, and he was going for it. But then I had to get up to speed. So they give you like 3 laps or something. And I think I figured it out like halfway through the second lap. So my third lap was fun, but like I kind of missed out on the first part of it. But it was so sick. Like, it's a little expensive, I guess, but honestly, it was such a fun experience. And like, just being able to be in one of those cars is such a unique feeling. And like, even just the little acceleration that I got to have, because you're so short, you get to like take off, and then they have the cones set up where you have to start braking.
Yeah, that's no time.
Yeah, you didn't
like 3 laps.
Yeah. But it still was some pretty wild acceleration.
But that's awesome.
Yeah, it was fun. Super fun.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting because you talk about the sliding around, being in the passenger seat of the first car. In North Wilkesboro, they're just repaving it, but it's one of the oldest surfaces we have in NASCAR. They just had a legit NASCAR race there again this year that revived. That hadn't been there since 1996.
Yeah.
So what's crazy that people don't realize is in NASCAR and in most forms of asphalt racing, we have slick tires. There's no tread on those tires. So
just like rock climbing shoes is what I've heard it compared to.
Yeah, right. And so, every 40 or 45 minutes, the tires are heating up and they're shedding the rubber that's left on there. And at the end of those 40 or 45 minutes on average, you have just the cords in the tires that's left. Wow. So that feeling you experience of the car sliding around, people will always say, like, oh, driving NASCAR is not that hard. Okay. So the environment you were in, going, probably in a real race, maybe 3/4 of it, just faster than you were. It's still an amazing experience, but doing that at full speed for 400 laps, 150 degrees inside the car. Every time you're on the brakes, it's 220 pounds of leg press in that. Whoa. And you're holding a death grip of the wheel. And, oh, by the way, you're shedding about 10 to 12 pounds of water weight during that race. And in the corners, you're pulling 3 Gs. It is intense. And you're sliding around because there's no grip.
Oh, yeah. It was intense, and I was going like 45. I was just trying to get my breath around it. I was like, dude, y'all got to go around like the kids going slow. Yeah. That's hilarious, dude.
No, I'm glad you got to experience that. Yeah. I wish a lot more people could experience it because everyone's like, oh, I'm going home from the 5 o'clock traffic and I'm driving like it's NASCAR. If you get strapped in that car, you mentioned the alien world that it is. It's really interesting to me because when you're in a normal environment that's driving a car or whatever, it all seems very easy. Mm-hmm. You step into that world and the high speed, the intensity of it, the little, inch or two that you're away from disaster.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just a man-machine connection. It's incredible. It's intoxicating. The sounds, everything with it. It's nuts.
Oh, it's so nuts. I'm glad you hit on what you're talking about in terms of like the physicality of it, because, if you're just looking at a car going around, a track, you really don't consider how much is happening inside the car because it's kind of from the outside. You don't see any of the person. Like, what when you were, and I guess as you're getting back into it now, like, what is your sort of just in between season or up to season training like regiment look like? Like, what types of stuff are you doing to get ready?
Yeah, it's good timing you asked. I'm building a gym in my new house here, and so I've had a different training regiment this last year because I was trying to build strength back up. Mm-hmm. Normally in racing, you're doing a lot of zone 2 cardio to get ready for it, to just make sure you're keeping your heart rate down. Yeah. And so an average NASCAR race is 3.5 hours. And so for that 3.5 hours, your average heart rate is 150 to 155 beats per minute. Dude. The only sport that compares with that is doing an Ironman or a marathon, things like that, because it's so strenuous. So, for me, I was done in 2019. Now it's 2024. Well, I spent this whole last year trying to rebuild that cardiovascular strength. Yeah. On top of that, your shoulder work is really important. So making sure you have a lot of endurance and stamina. The not so exciting part about NASCAR training is it's all endurance. It's all like there's nothing sexy to it. Like the vanity part is not there. Like if you want to be look at Patrick Mahomes, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's an incredible athlete, but the wide receivers look good, right? They can be on the cover of GQ, but the quarterbacks are like, yeah, they're all right. You know, there's nothing
Yeah.
like there's no amazing physique.
Yeah.
But then it's crazy because you look at so many specialized pro athletes
Hmm.
and nobody looks like a bodybuilder. So I was doing a lot of strength training to get it back. And now I'm transitioning to where I'm doing more cardio,
Mm.
more reflex training. I've
Yeah.
got one of those, if you watch Drive to Survive or Tyreek
Oh
Hill's
yeah, the lights.
YouTube channel, you see like this. Yeah, I get the lights. So I got that here
Nice.
showing up this week.
That's sick.
And then I have a Smith machine, Peloton, that kind of stuff. But when I'm in season, it's typically 6 days a week, and I'll do 45 minutes of strength training, and then typically 30 of cardio. And then one day, and there will be like kind of yoga, and then
Oh, nice.
mixing in a lot of core and reaction training. Again, that's when I'm really dialed in. I
Yeah.
haven't been dialed in a long time.
Yeah, you're getting it. You're getting it back. I would imagine like core because you got like you hit on like the leg press and like how you're holding the wheel. Like just holding yourself in place in the car feels like such a core workout every time you're hitting like a 3G turn.
Yeah, you look at the F1 and IndyCar drivers, why they're so small, and
Yeah.
the neck training is a big thing too. But they're so small, but they're kind of like soccer players. Their cores are so strong
Mm-hmm.
because you're trying to hold yourself up in the car when you're going into banking all the forces against you.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that the one variable that's a weak point is not the driver. You want to make sure that you're physically sharp because it's mentally taxing. So the stronger you can be physically for that endurance period, you don't have the mental wear. So then you can make quick, split second
Yeah.
decisions. If you're worn out and your body's tired and all these things are going on, you're thinking about that, and you can't. When you're talking about those kids, there's that little gap some of them see. Well, on the professional level, everyone sees those. So if you can't make that 1/10 of a second decision, it's literally 1/10 of a second.
all you
If
got.
you can't do that, that's your only chance.
So you got that reaction train. You got to be when you're training. You got to be hitting the lights right in time to be able to see it. What
Yeah.
You said 150 degrees. Are you doing sauna or like steam room or anything? Like, do you do any heat type of stuff?
Yeah, that was one of the first things I learned going into stock car racing was how hot it was. So being up here in Cleveland, it's cold all the time, it seems like. But I literally, when I was little, my parents had a steam shower. I would go get in snow pants, a sweatshirt, a hoodie, so double layered,
Yeah.
and then a snow jacket, and then a helmet, and just go sit in there about 145 degrees.
Yeah.
And now I have a sauna, and I'll do cold plunges in the morning. I really like those just for the mental part of it. Body feels good too, but my sauna, I'll crank it up to 185 to 194 somewhere in there, and just sit in there for 30 or 40 minutes.
Whoa, dang, that's intense. That's like you cutting weight for wrestling. That reminds me of like high school days trying to get down. Dang. What so when you're like on race day, like you're losing all that weight, like what are you doing before you get in the car, like to, I guess, I don't know, prepare? What are you eating or like consuming pre-race?
Yeah, it starts the day or two before.
Yeah.
So for me, when I was in NASCAR, now like the local racing stuff, you don't have it as much. I'm doing some sports car racing this year that I'll prep the same way I used to for NASCAR.
Yeah.
But like 2 days before, you start hydrating pretty heavily. Sometimes 3 days before, depending on if you know it's going to be 100 degrees. It's going to be 150 in the race car. If it's going to be 70 outside, probably 125, 130, not too bad. So you just know what your conditions are going to be for that weekend, and you prepare accordingly. So for me, 2-3 days before, Pedialyte, maybe do an IV. Liquid IVs are great. And then I really like to, the day before, it's these packets called the right stuff. I think they have Element, LMNT, those packets. So they're just chock full of sodium. And just kind of getting that in your system, 36 hours before. When I felt the best racing, I'd have a big ribeye the night before to kind of get that fat in me. But the morning of, I like to be full, but not super, super full. So if I can get some decent, like some avocado, maybe some eggs, maybe a little bit of carbs before there,
Yeah,
just to
for
feel
sure.
full and good, but you don't want to feel lethargic.
Yeah. Dang, dude, that's wild. 10 to 12 pounds over the course of like what, 3.5 hours in the peak?
Yeah, I remember the Coke 600, which is the longest race in the NASCAR Cup Series, the 600-mile race. This is
Yeah.
the only one that's that long.
Yeah.
Memorial Day weekend, and I weighed in.
And that's Atlanta, right?
Before, Charlotte.
Charlotte. Oh, Charlotte. Okay.
Yep. So I weighed in before the race, and we don't have weigh-ins, but I just wanted to see, like, for myself.
Yeah.
I weighed in at 172. I'm like 195 now. I was much smaller back then, but too small. And I weighed in at 172. After the race, I was 158. And that was just 4 hours later.
That is crazy. Dude, so you're in a car for like 3.5 hours. I mean, what are you thinking about for 3.5 hours? Like, are you always on for 3.5 hours? Or are there ever any moments where you're like, all right, like, I mean, what's the mental battle of 3.5 hours in a race car like?
It's one of the most fun things I think you can possibly imagine once
Really?
you
Okay.
feel it. Because you're going 200 miles per hour.
Yeah.
Maybe some tracks you're going slower.
Yeah.
But that's a football field every second. Is how quick that is. So when you are strapped in that car and you're going that fast, every corner is so important. Every 10th of a second is the difference from being 25th to 13th. I mean, the field, even like the winner in NASCAR, maybe 1 second a lap quicker than the last place car. And that's 40th.
Yeah. The margin is just so.
It's like, it's so tight. And really, when you're going that fast and it's that loud, no, we have hearing protection in there, but it's so intense. It's amazing. It's this wild thing. It's just this adrenaline, this dopamine thing that goes on.
Yeah.
Everything just becomes quiet. It's
crazy.
the most quiet place in the world. You're in the zone. It's unbelievably slow when you're really in it and you get in a rhythm. If we have a long green flag run, you're going for like 45 minutes an hour or something, like you're just green flag laps, like logging there.
Yeah.
Every corner you're looking for where's the quickest line. You're getting the relay of the spotter giving you the information, and maybe through the engineers talking to him, he'll relay that to you of where you should be going, what you're doing. Some tracks will run 1 to 2 inches off of a concrete wall on the outside at the corners. And so it becomes so immersive because everything about you is ingrained in what's going on. For me, I would sometimes have, when I got in that rhythm in those long green flag runs, I'd have a song kind of pop in my head.
Okay.
And so I just kind of say like the beat of that, like just like what was going on with it. Some guys, there's absolutely nothing. Who was it? Kelly Yarbrough. Yeah. There's some famous videos of him. He's a NASCAR Hall of Famer. Unfortunately, just passed away. But they mic'd him up like a live mic in the 80s, I think.
Oh, nice.
And he's going around the corner going, like making race car noises in his helmet. Like it just sounded ridiculous.
Yeah.
I think everybody has a little bit different thing of what they do. Yeah. But long story short, it is just so immersive that there's no way you can get out of it, because the second your mind's gone, you mess up.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Like you need to be in your like flow state almost to be able to stay competitive.
100%. That's the best term for it.
Yeah. What so you're in that you're in this like flow state, but you've got a lot of inputs coming your way from like your spotter and from your crew chief, I would assume, engineers. Like how much of the input do you feel like can dictate the performance of the race? Does that make sense? Like, is the crew chief driver like? Can a great crew chief like make or break a race for someone? You know what I'm saying?
100%. It is completely the quarterback coach relationship is a driver and the crew chief.
Yeah. Wow.
So the coaches, they're calling plays. Well, the crew chiefs are calling strategy plays. So when are we going to go pit? What are we changing in the car? It's my job as a driver to key up on the mic and tell them, what am I feeling? And then the engineers are looking at their data of lifetime feed to see what's going on with the car. What's the telemetry showing? Yeah. How is that matching up with what Matt's saying? And then when we come to pit road, there's typically a 5 to 7 lap window of when all cars will pit. but you might be taking 4 tires, you may be taking 2 tires, you
Yeah.
might be gas only. But let's say we go to Charlotte, for example, for that long race.
Mm-hmm.
If you come down lap 173 and you're going to short pit, which means you pit on the front side of that window for when your fuel is running out. Some place like Darlington, your tires are running out as well. So you're like just losing grip, which means you're losing time on the racetrack. So if you can perfectly plan of when the tires are losing grip, you can get fuel and make it to your next exit point, whether it's a stage end, which is kind of like hockey period pauses, or you can make it just to, the end of the race. If you can pit early, maybe you're going to save a net amount of 2 seconds. Well, on the track, that could be 3 spots.
That's right.
If you long pit it, maybe they're telling you, hey, we think we can make it to the end of the race. I had a race at Charlotte, actually, in a truck, and we were junk that day. Absolute crap. We were slow, just couldn't get out of our own way. Handling was bad all day, no grip. And my crew chief, he said, hey, we're going to play this long. We're not going to pit. We're just going to have you stay out there on old tires, which is miserable because you are like on banana peels. You have no grip. You're just hanging on for dear life. And, everybody else has fresh tires. Like they're just ripping it. And you're sitting there like a sitting duck. But because you don't pit, you save 35, 40 seconds, if not 60 seconds, depending on the track.
Yeah.
So we went from like 20th, we finished 5th. So that was my faith in the crew chief.
Yeah.
And he had faith in me to say, hey, I need you to save X amount of gas. I need you to hold on to the car because if you slip up and hit something, guess what? The whole plan just, completely crapped itself out. So, those calls are so important, but it starts before then. In the week leading up to the races, we go to the simulator. Back in the day, there would be full-on testing. You bring your car to the track and go practice.
Got it.
But now it's outlawed. So you go to your team's simulator. And these are, you'll look on TikTok and stuff and you'll see people doing iRacing and fun racing events and stuff on, those are nice setups a lot of people have. These are $5 million setups that Toyota, Ford, and Chevy have paid for themselves. And essentially it's a giant computer. It's a sled. So it moves left to right. It has some pitch and yoke to it. The seat belts to go mimic the G-forces in the car because you can't do it in a controlled environment. It's like an IMAX screen. They will press down on you to give you an airbag feeling of the G-forces. And so, they will press down on you and to simulate that G-force feeling, but they can change a thousandth of an inch on the car, whether it's in the shock or, maybe they're working on some different body settings or they're working on, changing track bars, springs, whatever it might be, aero offsets. And we can feel it immediately in the simulator. So we'll stop, reset it, go back out. So we practice all those things because in real life at the track, you have a 20-minute practice session. That's it. And then you go race for 500 miles.
Dang. A 20-minute practice session.
8 hours.
Yeah, 8 hours in a simulator. Dang.
Yeah.
And then you have qualifying, but at that point, you already need to be dialed in to be able to.
You got what you got.
You got what you got at that point. Dang, I gotta see what one of those simulators looks like. That sounds wild. So you have that relationship with your crew chief where you're trying to get the car dialed in, and then you're making those decisions in the race depending on how things are going. As you're getting into, I guess, that world, I mean, how are you thinking about, and this gets into the talking about teams and stuff, like and my only real perspective on this, I don't know anything about NASCAR. I've watched Drive to Survive, which the team dynamics are fascinating in terms of one guy comes in and is sort of bankrolled by someone he knows. There's another guy, there's sort of these guys that are always being recruited by other teams. I mean, is that experience similar to what it's like in NASCAR when you're trying to find a team, or it sounds like you probably did that a little differently of being part owner of a team, but what does that look like when you're trying to find your spot?
Yeah, the ownership side didn't come for me until afterwards, but there are some driver owner combos that go on. But I mean, the Drive to Survive example is a great example, and NASCAR just put out their own Netflix show a couple of days ago, and I think you'd actually get some good insight from it. It's a good show; they did a good job with it.
Yeah.
But Yeah, I mean, very, very similar. There's typically, the owners bankrolling it or the sponsors are,
Mm-hmm.
just depending on what the deal is. NASCAR typically, if your owner is a billionaire, you're going to have a lot of good resources with it. You're
Mm-hmm.
going to perform well. And then, the business to business side will kind of take care of some sponsorships. However, you got to be a presentable person on social media and as a marketing person and
Oh
wing
yeah.
essentially for the team and the sponsors. So nowadays the sponsorship model is to where you have to bring your own sponsorship to the teams most of the time to get a contract,
Okay.
even if you're getting paid. Like to break in the door, even if you're one of the best drivers, there's very few select opportunities now in NASCAR. If you if you're not sponsored, that you can
Mm-hmm.
break in.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, you have to bring in $3 to $5 million to go drive this car, and that's whether you have it,
Yeah.
like your family wise,
Yeah.
if you have Pepsi sponsoring you.
Yeah.
So you got to go be not only the athlete, but you got to be the CEO of your own brands to go bring
Jeez.
sponsorship funding to get value for companies to bring it to race teams.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're looking at different teams, and I've gone through I was a bit of a journeyman going through different teams, and
Yeah.
I feel like once you get past the financial part, you evaluate, okay, who's going to charge what and what's my value there.
Mm-hmm.
But past that point, just like any professional sports team, what's the relationship like with the people there? Am I
Yeah.
brand new, or what's my chemistry like? And chemistry is everything.
Mm-hmm.
I was at Joe Gibbs Racing for a few years, and that's one of the top teams in NASCAR. 2016 had a great year with them. 2017, I did not.
Yeah.
I liked the people on my team, but we just didn't click. And then I felt like I needed a change because we got better. At the end of 2017, we made a playoff run. That was okay, but it just wasn't clicking all the way. I moved to Richard Childress Racing in 2018, and the chemistry was immediate. They believed in me. I believed in them.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was cohesive. We all participated in what are we going to do with the car? How are we going to make things happen? So, I think it's back to the football example.
Yeah.
When the quarterback feels good in what the coach is calling, that's a good situation. The
Mm-hmm.
ideal situation is the coach is calling it, the quarterback agrees with it, but the quarterback also has the freedom to be in the huddle or, walking up to the line and saying, hey, we got to go change this and change the play.
Mm-hmm.
And then the two of them will respect each other for it. In racing, it's similar. Like, hey, if I want to go, this direction with the drop in the back of the car for this arrow offset, or we're going to go put
Mm-hmm.
more wedge in because I need that for my comfort. And you understand each other. You may say, dude, we shouldn't do that. You'll have that back and forth. But if you can't get to that conversation point, which a lot of people can't, you're never going to be able to go build that notebook. And when you can build that notebook, you can come back the second time or third time or whatever it might be to that track or sister tracks and say, hey, here's what we did. I like this feeling. Can we go, change this on the car to get that feeling back again? Because now I'm looking for what we did in Darlington, South Carolina. We made this change. Well, we're here at Richmond, Virginia now. I
Yeah.
need a similar feel. So let's go take what we did, apply it, and see if it works.
Yeah, that's fascinating. When you've got so many different people and to your point, a lot of money invested, that just creates such a unique scenario in something that's super intense. You got to find people who you can really lock arms with and be on the same team with to be able to move that forward. What was the experience like going from driving to owning? I mean, it's the same world, but I would assume a very kind of different interaction.
It's so different. It's
Yeah.
wildly, wildly different. When you're a driver, and we've all seen in elementary school classes or on in Google or something, there's a picture of an iceberg, right? And it's always talking about the blah, blah, blah is here, but the real stuff is down
Oh,
here. Well, that's
yeah.
literally what
Yeah.
the best example I can give here is, because when you're a driver, you see the tip of the iceberg. Everybody sees you, and
Mhm.
you're working with your team, and it's me against the world, it's our team against the world, whatever. Well, when you get in an ownership position, not only are you taking care of the driver, you're taking care of sponsors,
Yeah.
you're taking care of your employees, and you're taking care of their families because they got to get paid out of it. You're trying to get better competitively. You're trying to get better as a business. You're working with licensing and trademarks and the rules packages and competition and engineering and then the admin side of things and making sure that we had this big TV contract going on, charter renewals,
Yeah.
all these things that, especially for us being such a small team, I wear like 4 or 5 different hats in that environment.
Yeah.
It becomes where you have to be a jack of all trades.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think every ownership group is like that because they're more broken up people, but we just didn't have the budget for it.
Yeah.
So, in that role, we're trying to get better every year. And by being in charge of the business development side that I was, we try to bring back sponsors every year and grow those partnerships, and we were able to. But then you're dealing with rule changes. We had a brand new car in 2022. We started in 2021. So we have a car we already got. We did okay with it. We get a new car in 2022. We don't have the funding. We run like crap. Then 2023, we go change from Ford to Chevy, better motor package for us, and ran a bit better and closed the gap some. But then the field gets better. And then you're a month or two behind and catching up on what they learned from the aero side of things. There's something called the underwing underneath the car. And it looks flat, but in reality, they're bending it. Still within the rules, but they're bending it by thousandths, again, of an inch. Thousandths of an inch, not even the width of a quarter or a penny. It's wild. But by doing that, they're disrupting the airflow underneath the car, and they get some more downforce or less drag or whatever they're going for that particular track. So they're shaping and molding these things. And us sitting there with the stock, flat underwing, all of a sudden we look like crap because we're not able to go maximize our speed, and they're just gone. And then we catch up a few months later when we get the information. But that was a very hard thing because being a small team, you think when there's Ford, Chevy, and Toyota, and when you got the badge on your car of that emblem, they'd be helping you. Well, you got to be one of the big teams. If not, they will not help you, which is crazy. So we might as well be running Pontiac logos out there. It's insane.
Oh, fascinating.
So
the type of support you're getting from a manufacturer can differ vastly depending on how your team's performing, basically.
Well, not even how you're performing. Just they have agreements and they can only support so many teams, and it shouldn't be like that, but it is.
Yeah.
Like in F1, you have Mercedes has 2 teams, Ferrari has their teams, and Williams, and you go down the bunch with it. But in NASCAR, there's 40 cars and only 3 manufacturers, so they can't support everybody. So then you buy satellite technical support from the teams who do get that help. And then you might be getting good stuff, but they're getting the great stuff.
Yeah. So the team thing is fascinating, but the car manufacturer thing is interesting to me too, because it feels like, to your point, there are things that you can adjust, but a lot of it is pretty standard, no? Or they try to standardize a lot of those things?
Yeah. So NASCAR for a long time was always about ingenuity and engineering and development and like manipulating the bodies in the cars. They had pretty loose inspection practices. So they put a couple, basically these templates were going from nose to tail in the car or side to side on it to create this skeleton that everyone had to fit in their vehicle. Well, with this new car, it's essentially a kit car. So everything is very similar. People have like pieces. They're single source vendor suppliers, whereas the teams used to make everything before. So it took a lot of that out of it. Which I'm not sure is a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's created parity, but people also make a lot of trick stuff that's pretty cool. Which the workers liked and the fans liked. But anyways, with the car being so consistent now across the field, it's truly making it to where the drivers are becoming the show and being the stars. And us being a small team, we lacked resources. So when you get the help from up top, they might be saying, hey, take 0.4 of air pressure out, 0.4 of a pound of air pressure out. That's it. And it picked you up a half a second of speed. In the past, that'd be nothing.
But now these margins are everything in terms of having a competitive advantage. I mean,
you're just playing in the gray area. It's just those tiny margins you're in. And that can bring you from literally 25th to 3rd. Week to week.
That half second over the course of an entire race. I mean, that's wild. So back to the whole team dynamic. I mean, you're going from racing into this position where you're finding all of these different aspects you've got to take control of. I mean, what was the what was the team dynamic that you guys had? Like, how many people were basically in this organization for y'all?
Yeah, so myself and my partner, we were 50-50 on
Yeah.
that and for the ownership group. But then we had at our I'd say our biggest amount, not counting pit crews because we leased the pit crews from Sewer Haas Racing.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most we had was 12 or 13 people.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And some of those would be like flying into the track.
Mm-hmm.
The next smallest team was about per car was like 35 people.
Whoa.
And then most teams like Joe Gibbs Racing, RCR, Hendrick have anywhere from 300 to 500 people in their organization.
Jeez.
We had 12.
It's like David versus Goliath. Like that's a
100%.
Yeah.
But you know, if this was the 2000 teens or so, maybe we have a shot to get better. We ran like 28th or 27th on average in 2021 with the car before this next gen car. But once this kit car, spec car called the next gen car came along, it really eliminated the chance for you to hit on something and be incredibly good with it. But there's also 7 or 8 cars that are kind of in our class too. So from like 26 to 40th, you had this group that would race each other.
Got it.
Almost in sports car racing where you had like your other series involved in there.
Yeah.
But now everyone's on the same playing field. And I think it's a good thing. I really do for the goodness of the sport. You know, when we bought the team, we never looked at this. And I'll use the word charter here.
Yeah.
NASCAR used the word charter instead of franchise, but just think of it as a franchise, just like, you know, the New York Yankees or the Houston Texans, whatever you want to be, it's a franchise.
Yeah.
So when we bought this charter, the idea was to be a successful race team and have a good business along with it, but to be around for 10 or 20 years. Well, when you buy it back in 2020, they were very, very cheap. And then you go years down the line and they're selling for record numbers. So it became an interesting thing because the dynamic of the team from competition to admin and everything was very small. And we were trying to keep on making it and improve. But we got to a point last year where we realized that there was no way in the David versus Goliath battle that we were actually going to overcome it unless we had giant funding come in. And I mean, tens of millions of dollars per year or an influx of a billionaire, somebody like that to go pick up the program. And we were just, it wasn't the right timing for us to stay in as owners anymore to run a competitive team. Like we busted our ass to try to make it happen, but it just didn't. So, you know, we turned down a lot of offers, but eventually we had our number and, you know, just decided to move on because, you know, it's one of those deal or no deal things where you go, hey, we could hold out, maybe we get better.
No, I get that.
The amount of funding we'd have to put in, you know, individually was just millions to become even relevant. So that's a hard thing in a business too, is saying, when is it time to sell? You know, when do you say, hey, it's time to hang it up?
Dude, it sounds a lot like startup world, no? Like you get into something, you're investing in it, doing the thing, then you see some upside. So I totally get that. I'm curious, you know, and this is another thing that, you know, my only visibility has been from some of the F1 content I've seen, but like, it seems like the investment in general for these teams is so high. And I guess to your point, like it can scale. What's the conversation with a sponsor or like even a team where you can run a NASCAR charter, or you could run one of these, I guess just racing teams in general? Is the revenue coming from fans, or like what makes this like a worthwhile venture, I guess you could say, for on one side, like the team owner, but on the other side, the sponsor? Like, what are they looking at to make it feel like it was a good thing? Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. It's the world I've lived in for a while.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with the sponsor side because they're very different than the ownership models and people coming in to buy into NASCAR. So the sponsorship model, typically they're not vested. They don't have a vested interest in team ownership. Typically they want to be, you know, you think of Jeff Gordon, you think of DuPont and Pepsi, you think of Dale Jr., you think of Budweiser, Tony Stewart, Home Depot. Like those were the big names that people knew in the 2000s. Well, back then, companies were spending $30 million per year on these sponsorships.
Whoa.
And because of it, the teams had this giant surplus of cash, and they're paying drivers and employees handsomely, and you could do whatever you wanted to back then.
Yeah.
Well, 2007 was kind of the first shift when companies realized there was digital advertising.
Mm-hmm.
Back before then, it's all sports, it's all TV, everything's linear TV and cable packages. And so all of a sudden this big shift comes in. Okay, well, the sport just had its biggest year ever. Great. NASCAR's on top, big TV deals, big money. They're on Saturday Night Live. They're on every magazine. You can't walk anywhere without seeing, Dale Sr., Jeff Gordon, all the people I just said, Dale Jr. Everyone knows them. Everyone sees them in bars, like on the walls everywhere. Can you say that now? I don't think so.
No.
And the reason is because 2008 hit. Of course, big recession happens.
Yeah.
And that killed it from 2008 to 2011. Well, think about who was impacted so much by that. It was the manufacturers of the automakers, the manufacturers there. They had to cut back in all their, Chevy was coming out with all these stupid cars. They were just fun. They were like passion projects. So they could put whatever they wanted to in racing. It didn't matter because it was, win on Sunday, buy on Monday. That was the philosophy. Maybe there's still some of that, but even more so back then.
I love that.
So as you keep on going in time, okay, so 2011, here we are. We're starting to get out of the recession a little bit, but still feeling, pretty beat up from there. All right, what happens in those 3 years? The budgets fell down for these companies too. So they're saying, 30 million. Let's fast forward to 2018, 2019 here, because we're, I don't want to spend forever on this. Now the sponsorships for a full year is 12 to 15 million for a lot of teams. So it's cut in half.
Yeah.
Driver salaries, they're making 20 million bucks back then. 8, 10, is a normal salary for, non-star drivers. Yeah. Now, 3 million, maybe 5 million. Rookie contracts are $750,000. Back then, maybe you're in the millions. But you think of all these things happening, and you go, okay, I'm seeing all this stuff about NASCAR and decline of TV ratings. There's not nearly as many people watching. People are moving away from cable TV in general. You got Amazon, you got Netflix, you got Hulu, whatever.
Yeah.
How do we keep them interested? So the sponsorship model now, you have to have either a business-to-business play. That's number one. So you see a lot of Toyota cars branded with other, whether it's like Mobile One or Sirius XM. They're doing deals with the real cars too. Like that's going to the consumer side, and they're making that work through the NASCAR model. You look at consumer products. Well, let's say Celsius, for example. If you look at a Celsius car, what's on the back of that race car? Vitamin Shop, Circle K, whatever it might be, because they're saying, hey, if you want to, work with us here on this, we'll have the Celsius car. We'll showcase you guys, bring out all your salespeople, do everything with that. We'll get better SKUs, better end caps, whatever. Something to go drive that ROI there. Okay, well, let's go another part past that. If you go to social media, advertising, stuff like that, there's got to be a value for impressions and engagement, everything there. If you can make all that work, gosh, you've got a great sponsor. They'll come back every year. But you have to have those line up. A lot of people will come in because, professional motorsport, it's one of the big sports in America. Still, NASCAR is. You get 3.4 million viewers per race. And it's sexy still to them to be a part of that. But they'll do it. Maybe they get 1 to 5 races to go, okay, look at our bottom line. Nothing moved here. What happened? If you don't build that holistic program, you'll never have people come back. So that's a hard thing now because people in the past were just like, this is cool. Here's a bunch of money. This is cool. Here's a bunch of money.
Go
race it. Here for a sponsor to be involved, have fun. Screw it. Why not? And you see that now in the renaissance of college football, right? It's just crazy these last 3 or 4 years. They're going different places. They're still in sports marketing, but soccer now popping off. Soccer is really taking a lot of these companies over there. Pickleball saw some. UFC obviously been big here recently. But, those are the areas where people are going. Well, to sponsor a race car, it's still, for a big team, $300,000 to $400,000 per race. So it's not a small investment whatsoever. So there's got to be some return for them. But to change pace a little bit and go on the ownership side. Well, first off, as an owner, you have to have sponsors because the Yeah, your question before was asking, where does the revenue come from?
Yeah, exactly.
If you look up right now, there is, I call it a collective bargaining agreement. It is the best way to figure out like what's a parallel to look at how this is changing.
Yeah.
So we're trying to work on the collective bargaining agreement for a long time here now. Excuse me. NASCAR is they own a lot of the tracks. They own the TV deal, of course, and then they pay out a percentage to NASCAR teams. Well, for a long time, NASCAR is paying out about 11% to the teams. It's a very small amount. And then split that across 36 charters.
No, exactly.
Franchises.
Like...
So take that 11 divided by 36, you got pennies. Most teams are not profitable at all. So currently, in 2024, this is supposed to be done 45 days ago, still not. They are working on creating a revenue stream that is good for the teams out of this TV deal to where they can have healthier teams. We all know in the U.S. right now, prices of everything are going up. So salaries we had for people can't cut it. So got to hire maybe not more people, but more qualified people that can get the job done. Also, give them 401ks, give them benefits, give them time off. That's not something people used to do in racing. They used to join them and do it because they loved it. Well, now, guess what? You can look around and see so many people hiring for, if you have the correct qualifications, and go, I can make, 70 grand here, never see my family, or go make 75 grand, have benefits, get time off, see my family at night, have weekends off, whatever.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to do. So teams are very adamant about fixing that. Also, more budget. You can go have more commercials, put people on television, have them do more events, because if they're getting more of the pie, they're going to be vested in NASCAR's success of selling tickets, but doing all those things. But right now, there's not a revenue stream for it, so they're trying to fix that model. But to answer your question of why would you get into it, if you're looking to get into racing now, I would say it's not for the value, the franchise value part of it. Maybe that changed 2 years ago. But they have to get this deal done with the teams first, and then it'll absolutely be about the value of these teams. We've seen the values go up 10x of what they were 3 or 4 years ago. So there is a play. And looking at teams selling, I can't say what ours went for, but they're getting into values where it's comparable to 1990s and 80s NBA teams. And then all of a sudden, or maybe F1 teams, and they have just exploded as them. So now the question becomes, if they get this deal right, does this become a sector where people go invest in NASCAR teams? Maybe not majority ownership, but have a stake in there. LeBron James and the Fenway Group, they bought into Roush Fenway Racing. Michael Jordan now owns part of 2311 Racing. Justin Marks and Pitbull own Trackhouse Racing. So you've seen these big names come in. And there's obviously a play, down the road. But then you have to say, do we really want to get out? Can we make money during it? And that whole long spiel thing I've given is the sponsors do not cover, they will cover a ton of expenses, but they don't cover the gap that the teams are not able to cover right now with the high expenses. So if they get this deal right, the hope is, okay, we're going to have a spending cap for everybody. And, there'll be a luxury tax above that. There may be a ceiling or a floor. We don't know about that yet. We'll see where it goes. But once that's done, there may be a model to where sponsorship comes in and the sponsorship actually pays for, driver salaries and stuff in turn, because it's high enough to give, teams the best chance to get the best drivers and the best employees, which is how it should be. There's not in that place yet.
That's so interesting. Like all of those dynamics, like how a sponsorship could be leveraged, but also just the reality of like how they're trying to refigure it given the new landscape of the world. I mean, that's insanely interesting. What
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say with sponsorships and like not necessarily sponsorships, but with like interest in the sport and whatnot, like to me, doing that content around it is so smart. Like I gotta watch that Netflix series, but like just how many more people in my friend groups started talking about racing after Drive to Survive came out. Like, it was never a topic of discussion. And then before you know it, we're talking about the the inner team dynamics and like, I can't believe that dude got a team, or like, did you see what, with Danny Ricciardo, like all the things. So like, I don't know. It'll be cool to see like how that impacts the sport, with having more content about it.
Yeah, I think it's a really good move. I think we're 2 years too late to optimize it fully.
Yeah.
But, yesterday it was number 5 in the US in Netflix. It was the top 10 in the UK, South Africa, a bunch of places. So a lot of people are putting their eyes on NASCAR for the first time they've ever seen it, which is exactly the goal of what it should have been. I think they need to continue it. I think it's a testament to what Formula One has done, because in the U.S., Formula One was a laughable stepchild to NASCAR for a long time, as in comparison of audience and everything. Even today, 3 million people watch NASCAR races, but 800,000 in the U.S. will watch F1.
Yeah.
Okay, well, obviously not everything's primetime races and stuff. I think the things they did have for primetime were like 1.2 million Dakota. But when you look at how the whole environment and landscape has changed, Netflix has now made you a fan. Everybody I talk to is like, oh yeah, F1. Well, the social media, the streaming pieces of it, you look at F1 drivers. They have so many millions of followers. Lewis Hamilton is 11 million, something like that. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, he's Sir Lewis Hamilton. He was knighted. That's nuts for a race car driver to be knighted.
Crazy.
Maybe Schumacher and Andretti, but that's just wild to me.
Yeah.
But you look at NASCAR and how big it is, especially how big it was, to continue down a path of any growth and getting growth back. I think they have to go global, not to go compete with F1 by any means, but go to Montreal, go to Mexico City, maybe do a one-off across the pond somewhere.
Yeah.
Not overdo it, but just enough to have a taste, to go spark some interest, because F1, I think a lot of the interest is, look at the drivers. They have that exotic flair. They have the different accents. There's all kinds of things going on with that. Well, look at NASCAR now. You have Daniel Suarez. You have Bubba Wallace. You have Haley Deegan. Hopefully she becomes something of a star someday in the Cup Series. You have these personalities coming in. You have Chase Elliott, who's the typical driver, but he's the NASCAR Georgia boy, who's the big guy in there.
Yeah.
I think we have enough personalities now. The problem is, so the NASCAR show that just came out, not all the teams and not all the drivers wanted to be a part of it. They also couldn't because they were in the playoffs and that wasn't the storyline. Well, when you're so protected from a sponsorship standpoint, what happened and what happened was the teams didn't want their drivers to be on the show because Netflix had creative control. So when you have creative control, they're like, well, if they say shit or they say, if they're dropping F-bombs, we can't have that. And it's hard because, it's true raw emotion. Everybody knows it goes on. But if I'm not saying they did this because they were part of the show, but if Shell and Pennzoil says, nah, Joey, we didn't like you swearing on TV, and they take your sponsorship away, guess what? The barrier to entry in this sport is money. So all of a sudden, they don't say, got to thank the guys today. The car was really good. The whole stereotypical spiel. If they get outside of that, the fear is they will lose their job because they lose the sponsorship. On the other hand, it goes both ways, because if you don't have a personality and people don't know about you, the sport dies off. You don't have a sponsorship.
Yeah, exactly.
It's this double-edged sword. And so I applaud the guys that were a part of this program, especially Denny. I mean, Denny Hamlin is one of the most outspoken guys in the garage, but he also gets it. He knows that you got to put yourself out there. Does he come off as a jackass sometimes? Absolutely. But it's Denny, and that's his personality, and we need that personality. I think we saw in the F1 show, so many guys, you're like, what did he just say? And there's dynamics in there. There's so much of that in NASCAR, but it's also an Americana, Southern redneck feel to it that I think sometimes we run from, and we don't need to, because it's such a, it's just
the heritage of it all, it's kind of what makes it unique.
It's a diamond. It's a diamond in the rough of like, these are real people, There's same people like Ross Chastain. He's a watermelon farmer, like literally a watermelon farmer. And he's driving in one of the most premier sports in the US.
Yeah.
So I really hope that they hit on something with this and it shows growth, because it's good timing coming into the season. Where I don't know, what they do is Liberty Media bought F1. It's a media company. The races are an hour and a half long. They bring in the A-listers everywhere. I don't know how long that lasts in its popularity peak right now. I think they are peaking.
Yeah.
There already are a few examples of decline in viewership because, the seasons are getting longer, season 6 and Drive to Survive. So, is it a Netflix show or is it a real sport?
Yeah.
You got to kind of weigh that out.
No, that's an interesting dynamic. Yeah, I like what you said about NASCAR having some of that, like, Southern, redneck type of heritage. Because you're right, like there are some, and even where the sport came from, like it's rooted in that Southern tradition. So
yeah,
why not like?
So
lean
do you know
into
the story? I mean,
yeah, running moonshine, right? Isn't that what they all say?
Yep. Yeah. Souped up cars go run moonshine. I mean, literally, it was bootleggers started this. And for those listening who don't know, they had these cars that they built up to run from the cops in the Appalachian Mountains. And then after Prohibition ended, they took the cars down to Daytona Beach because it's one of the flattest beaches in the U.S. And so you could run cars down it. They try and go run land speed world records like what they do in the Salt Flats now, but they did that in Daytona. And then eventually somebody said, hey, we should go run a race at the hotel there in Daytona. They formed NASCAR and they ran half the race on the beach, half of it on the road. And now Daytona International Speedway is a few miles down the road where they run the Daytona 500 every year.
Yeah. That's right. I forgot about how it was half sand, half pavement. That's hilarious. Dude, so what's
they literally had to time out the race because of the tides and everything. Like that's how they figured out when to start the race, was if it's low tide or high tide.
Water's coming in, boys. Strap it up. Dude, so what's next for you? What's the rest of the year looking like? What are you getting into? Because you're getting back into the swing of things here.
Yeah, so I moved up to Cleveland. I have a baby on the way. So nice. My wife and I are expecting our first kid. So really looking forward to that. So that'll be in the summer. But until then, I am racing in about 30 races this year between dirt racing across the Midwest. I got some sports car races as well in the Trans Am series.
Yeah.
And then I will be helping run the program for Blaster. PB Blaster is my sponsor.
Yeah.
And so they're going to run a few races with a team in NASCAR. They're releasing that next week, so I'm not sure if I can say it yet, but y'all will figure it out if you listen to this. Yeah. But I'll be helping them run that program. So, between all those things, we're really excited about that. Dude, we have awesome. A bunch of things here with University Hospitals. We work a lot with them, with some philanthropic things that we're going to get into here soon.
Yeah.
My wife is in Africa right now, actually, for that. We're opening up a clinic out there.
Dang.
So a lot of things going on, but I'm excited to get back in the seat, get back to training here once we finish up this gym tomorrow. It's been exciting. It's been a lot of fun.
Dude, super cool, man. Well, this was fascinating, man. I learned a lot about this whole dynamic of racing. So appreciate you sharing so much. It sounds exciting, dude. Like I can't wait to tune into the Netflix stuff. I have to stay posted too with what you've got going on, following along online and whatnot. Where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am at Matt_Tifft, TIFFT. And then we'll be on some national television races this year, some streaming, but I'm in the 57 car all year long. And you can find most of the stuff on socials, obviously.
Yeah, we'll be sure to have you tagged and whatnot, and we'll do some collab Instagram posts and stuff. But dude, thank you so much for coming on today. This was a blast.
Oh, thank you.
All right, brother. All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Peace.